Welcome to Sex 101. Sex 101 is created to empower our sexes and relationships. Another week, another great episode. Beyond Identity Anesthesia. What ancient wisdom reveals about modern infidelity.
And this, of course, is part two because the presentation is part two is a follow up to the part one reaction to the article by the Psychology Pulse, maintaining that men don't cheat because they don't love you, they cheat to feel alive again. The thesis of the piece maintains that when love becomes familiar, some men don't leave you, they leave the version of themselves they can no longer feel.
Yes, indeed. So, Mr. Meg, the article mentioned the long term intimacy exposes man's unprocessed wounds and emotional blind spots. Is there a wisdom in the ancient sources about dealing with these deeper psychological issues?
Absolutely. And this is where I think the article actually stumbles upon something important, but then completely misses what to do with it. Yes, intimate relationships expose unprocessed wounds, but the ancient wisdom traditions would say that's exactly what needs to happen, not so that you can escape to someone who won't see them, but so you can finally address them. Augustine's Confessions is essentially a 200-page exercise in radical self examination. He looks unflinchingly at his own patterns of self deception, his sexual compulsions, his pride, his fears. But here's what's crucial: he does this after his conversion as a bishop when he's already supposed to have it all together. He's modeling what Christians come to call examen, the daily practice of honest self reflection. The wounds don't heal when you hide from them and run from people who might see them. They heal when you acknowledge them in the light. The Psalms gives us as remarkable examples of this kind of brutal honesty before God. Psalm 51, traditionally attributed to David after his adultery with Bathsheba, doesn't make excuses. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. There's no attempt to explain it away as identity collapse or the need to feel alive. There's confession, repentance, and a plea for God to create in me a clean heart. The psalm assumes that the way forward isn't escaping accountability, but moving it towards restoration. John Chrysostom, in his pastoral writings, has repeatedly emphasized the importance of what he calls metanoia, genuine repentance that involves a complete change of mind. This isn't just feeling bad about your behavior, it's a fundamental reorientation of your desires and patterns of thinking. When he counsels married couples, he urges them toward mutual confession and forgiveness, creating a relationship where wounds can be acknowledged rather than hidden. The Stoics, particularly Seneca, practiced something similar. In his letters, Seneca describes the practice of reviewing each day before sleep. When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, aware of this habit that's now mine, I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. This is the opposite of the performance mentality the article describes. It's a commitment to radical self knowledge. What's striking is how modern trauma therapy has rediscovered the necessity of what these ancient traditions practice. Bessel van der Kolk's research on trauma shows that healing requires what he calls befriending your emotions rather than suppressing or escaping them. When attachment wounds from childhood create emotional blind spots in adulthood, the solution isn't finding a partner who won't trigger those wounds, it's processing them in the context of a safe relationship. Here's where the article's framework falls apart most dramatically. It suggests that when a long term partner becomes a mirror reflecting your weaknesses and wounds, the man chooses escape over evolution. But the ancient Christian tradition would say that this moment of exposure is precisely when evolution becomes possible. Gregory of Nyssa writes about how spiritual growth requires repeatedly confronting our attachments and fears, allowing God's light to illuminate what we prefer to keep hidden. The Desert Fathers, those early Christian monks who went into the Egyptian desert in the 3rd and 4th centuries, developed a whole tradition around this. They called it disclosure of thoughts, regularly confessing not just actions, but temptations, resentments, and internal struggles to a spiritual father or mother. The assumption was that wounds and temptations have power over you and lonely as long as you remain hidden. Once exposed in a trusted relationship, they begin to lose their grip. Tertullian writes in On Repentance about how confession is difficult precisely because it requires humility, admitting you're not the impressive person you want to be seen as. But he argues that this temporary humiliation is the path to genuine freedom. The man who confesses his wounds and works to address them becomes stronger, not weaker. The man who hides them by finding someone who doesn't see them yet remains enslaved to them. Modern research on couples therapy supports this completely. John Gottman's work identifies what he calls repair attempts, moments when partners acknowledge hurt, take responsibility, and work towards a reconnection. Couples who can successfully repair are those where both partners are willing to be vulnerable about their mistakes and wounds. The ones who divorce are often those which pride prevents this kind of honest vulnerability. What about the claim that men cheat because they could not love the man they had become? The ancient Christian response would be that this is actually close to the truth, but the solution isn't escaping to perform a different self, it's the painful work of transformation. Paul writes in Romans about the internal conflict between wanting to do right and finding himself doing wrong. But his solution isn't to find a new audience, it's renewal of the mind and dependence on the spirit. The philosopher Epictetus taught his students to distinguish between the harm that external events cause and the harm we cause ourselves by our judgments about those events. The man who feels humiliated by being truly known in his marriage is suffering primarily from his own judgment that being imperfect is shameful. The Stoic practice was to challenge those judgments, to recognize that being fully human means being flawed, and that wisdom comes from accepting this rather than constantly performing an impossible perfection. In conclusion, ancient wisdom treats the exposure of wounds not as a problem requiring an escape, but the necessary precondition for healing, which means the mirror of long term intimacy is actually a gift, even when it's painful to look at what it reflects.
So the article says men choose escape over evolution. What would choosing evolution actually look like from the perspective of these ancient traditions, Mr. Mac?
This is where we get the real alternative vision, and it's so much more demanding and more beautiful than what the article offers. Choosing evolution means embracing what the early Christians called theosis or divinization, the process of becoming more fully human by being conformed to the image of Christ. And that process, they insisted, happens precisely through the challenges of a covenant relationship, not despite them. Let's start with Paul's letter to the Ephesians, which gives us the most developed theology of Christian marriage in the New Testament. When Paul writes about marriage reflecting Christ in the church, he's not just making a nice metaphor. He's saying the daily practice of faithful marriage is actually one of the primary contexts where human beings learn to love like God loves, unconditionally, sacrificially, permanently. This means that the moments when marriage feels stagnant or when you're fully exposed in your weakness aren't obstacles to growth, they're the curriculum. Augustine, drawing on his Neoplatonic philosophical training, understood transformation as a gradual process of reordering loves. In On Christian Doctrine, he distinguishes between use and enjoyment. Some things we should merely use as a means to an end, while others we should enjoy as ends in themselves. The man who treats marriage as a means to feel impressive has the categories reversed. The wife should be enjoyed and delighted in. The feeling of being impressive should be used in the service of something greater. Here's a concrete example of what evolution looks like: humility. The article describes men feeling transparent, unimpressive, unremarkable, and long term marriage as if this is obviously bad. But what if it's actually the necessary demolition of pride that makes genuine intimacy possible? John Climacus, a 7th century monk, wrote The Ladder of Divine Ascent, which describes spiritual progress as ascending rungs on a ladder. One of the early crucial rungs is humility, accepting you're not the center of the universe and that your true worth doesn't depend on being impressive. In the context of marriage, this would mean accepting that being fully known, habits, weaknesses, fears, and all, is where real love begins. The performing self, the one trying to be impressive, never actually experiences genuine love because it's always wearing a mask. Being unremarkable to your spouse might actually mean you're finally being yourself rather than performing, and her continued presence means she loves the real you, not the show. The Jewish tradition has this concept of repairing or perfecting the world, but before you can participate in cosmic repair, there has to be a repair of character traits. The wisdom literature emphasizes how difficult this is. Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. Evolution means the patient, difficult work of addressing your own character defects rather than blaming circumstances for escaping to easier situations. Classical Stoicism offers practical exercises for this kind of character formation and evolution. Marcus Aurelius practices what he calls view from above, imagining how this current concerns will look from a cosmic perspective or in 100 years. The man tempted to cheat might feel alive, would ask himself, will this matter in a decade? What will I think of this choice at my age of 70? What man do I actually want to be? This isn't suppressing desire, it's developing the capacity to step back and make choices aligned with your deepest values rather than your immediate impulses. The early Christian spiritual directors developed detailed practices for transformation within everyday life. Ponticus, in the 4th century, identified 8 logismoi, or thoughts that attack the soul, essentially the precursors to the medieval 7 deadly sins. He taught that spiritual progress required identifying which particular thoughts had power over you and then developing specific countermeasures. For the man tempted toward infidelity out of vanity or boredom, this might mean deliberately practicing gratitude, serving his spouse in hidden ways that receive no praise, and cultivating interior contentment rather than external validation. What modern psychology calls growth mindset. Carol Dweck's research showing that people who believe they can develop abilities through effort outperform those who see abilities as fixed, parallels what the ancients taught about virtue. You're not stuck at being the person you are. But transformation requires what Aristotle called phronosis, or practical wisdom, gained through experience, reflection, and repeated practice. The man who feels stagnant in his marriage could be pursuing new hobbies with his wife, engaging in meaningful service together, developing spiritual practices, reading challenging books, having deeper conversations. Countless paths to growth that don't require betrayal. Sue Johnson's attachment research shows that couples can actually rewire their attachment patterns through what she calls bonding conversations, moments of vulnerability where partners share their deepest fears and needs and receive compassionate responses. This is evolution in real time, moving from defensive self protection towards secure interdependence. But it requires exactly what the article's framework discourages: staying present with discomfort rather than escaping to novelty. The Christian spiritual tradition also emphasized the role of suffering in transformation. Peter's first letter tells Christians not to be surprised by trials, but to rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings. This isn't masochism, it's recognition that character is forged through difficulty. The moments when marriage feels dead, when you feel exposed and unimpressive, when routine has replaced excitement. These are the crucible where shallow personality gets refined into genuine character. Thomas à Kempis, in The Imitation of Christ, writes, we must not therefore despair when we are tempted, but the more fervently pray to God that he will vouchsafe us to help us in all tribulation. Evolution means learning to see temptations not as permission to act, but as an opportunity to grow. Every moment you choose faithfulness over the immediate appeal of novelty, you're literally rewiring the brain's reward pathways, something neuroscience now confirms through research on neuroplasticity. What would concrete evolution look like for the man the article describes? It might mean going to therapy to address the performance anxiety and need for external validation, initiating vulnerable conversations with his wife about how he's feeling, investing in shared new experiences that create the novelty research shows maintains attraction, developing spiritual practices that ground identity in something deeper than others' admiration, pursuing meaningful work or service that provide purpose, building friendships with other men committed to integrity who can offer accountability. Notice that all these require more courage than an affair, not less. The article treats infidelity as if it's this brave act of seeking aliveness, but actually, it's the coward's way out. Real courage is looking at the unsexy work of personal transformation and saying, I'm going to do this hard thing rather than taking the easy escape. In conclusion, evolution within a covenant isn't about grimly enduring a dead relationship. It's about recognizing that the very difficulties that make escape tempting are precisely the materials from which genuine growth, deep intimacy, and hard won character are built.
Mr. Mick, let's bring this full circle. If the article is wrong that men need affairs to feel alive, where does genuine aliveness actually come from according to ancient wisdom?
This is the most important question because the article assumes that aliveness and faithfulness are opposites, that you either feel alive through novelty and performance or you resign yourself to stagnant faithfulness. But the ancient traditions, both religious and philosophical, insisted that the deepest aliveness comes precisely from fidelity, presence, and cultivated virtue. They understood something we've forgotten, that the capacity for genuine joy and wonder has to be developed, and it's most available to those who practice faithfulness. Jesus says in John's Gospel, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. The Greek word he uses is zoe, not just biological existence, but vivid, flourishing life. And here's what's radical: he's offering this abundant life in the context of self denial, cross bearing, and faithfulness unto death. The Christian claim is that real aliveness isn't found by escaping constraint, but by embracing the right constraints, commitments that actually make human life possible. The Song of Solomon gives us this gorgeous vision of marital love that's anything but stagnant. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death, jealousy is fierce as the grave. This is passionate, exclusive, fiercely committed love. The aliveness comes not from novelty, but from the depth of knowing and being known. The lovers delight in each other, not despite long commitment, but because of it. They've learned each other's languages, preferences, bodies. Augustine, after his conversion and years of marriage counseling as a bishop, writes about marriage in terms of amicitia, friendship. He argues that the highest form of marital love includes eros, passion, but matures into philia, deep friendship, and ultimately reflects agape, self giving love. This progression doesn't mean passion dies, it means passion gets integrated into something deeper and more stable. The aliveness of mature love is like the difference between fireworks and a hearth fire. One is spectacular but brief, the other sustains life. The Stoics, particularly Epictetus, taught that genuine freedom and joy come from aligning your will with nature and virtue rather than chasing whatever impulse arises. He writes, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. The man who feels dead because he's not receiving external validation is enslaved to others' opinions. The man who has learned to find satisfaction in living with integrity experiences a freedom that circumstances can't touch. This is where modern positive psychology actually recovers ancient wisdom. There's research on flow. Those moments of complete absorption and aliveness shows that it comes not from passive entertainment or novelty, but from engaging in challenging activities that require skill development. Flow happens when you're pushing your capacities and focus meaningful work. Applying this to marriage, The aliveness the article man's seeking won't come from finding a new audience, but from deepening his capacity for intimacy, communication, emotional attunement, and spiritual connections with his actual spouse. Martin Seligman's research on authentic happiness identifies three levels: the pleasant life, pleasures and positive emotions; the good life, engagement and flow; and the meaningful life, using strengths in service of something larger than yourself. The affair the article describes might provide temporary pleasant feelings, but it undermines both the good life and the meaningful life. Genuine flourishing requires the integration of all three levels, and that's only possible within commitments you're not constantly subverting. The early monastic tradition developed practices specifically aimed at cultivating wonder and aliveness at what outsiders would consider boring routine. Brother Lawrence, in The Practice of the Presence of God, describes finding profound joy in washing dishes and mending sandals by doing them in conscious awareness of God's presence. The principle applies to marriage. Aliveness comes not from the circumstances being exciting, but from the quality of attention you bring to them. G.K. Chesterton wrote that the world will never starve for want of wonders, but only for want of wonder. The man who feels his marriage is stagnant has lost the capacity for wonder, not the marriage itself. Recovering wonder means practicing gratitude, attention, playfulness, and curiosity, dispositions that can be cultivated but require intention. The Jewish practice of Shabbat interrupts routine not by seeking novelty, but by designating sacred time for rest, delight, and presence. Married couples who practice something similar, regular times of undistracted connection and play, report sustained satisfaction. The Christian mystical tradition speaks of finding God in the ordinary. Simone Weil writes about absolute attention as a form of prayer, bringing your complete presence to whatever is before you. When applied to marriage, this means the aliveness comes not from your spouse being new or mysterious, but from your willingness to attend to her with fresh eyes, to notice details you've overlooked, to be genuinely curious about her internal experience. Neuroscience confirms that our brains are designed for habituation. We stop noticing familiar things, but we can deliberately override this through practices of gratitude and mindful attention. Studies show that couples who regularly express appreciation and notice positive qualities in their partners maintain higher relationship satisfaction. The aliveness isn't in the circumstances, it's in the quality of consciousness you bring to them. What about the claim that performance makes men feel alive? There's truth here, but it needs reframing. Augustine's concept of eudaimonia, often translated as happiness but better understood as flourishing, comes from arete, excellence, or virtue. There is genuine aliveness in performing excellency and developing and exercising capabilities. But the excellent performance that creates real flourishing is living with integrity, being faithful, being more patient and compassionate, not performing impressively for an audience. The article treats the younger, more admired self as more alive than the mature, fully known self. But Seneca writes, life is long if you know how to use it. The mature self that has practiced fidelity, integrated shadow material, and developed genuine virtue is far more alive than the immature self constantly seeking external validation. The aliveness of youth is largely unconscious and dependent on circumstances. The aliveness of maturity is chosen and stable. In conclusion, ancient wisdom insists that the deepest aliveness, Zoe, abundant life, comes not from escaping covenant when it feels stagnant, but from developing the capacities for presence, wonder, gratitude, and genuine virtue that make any circumstances, including long term marriage, a context for continuous discovery and growth.
Mr. Meg, how do we wrap up this reflection?
The article, Men Don't Cheat Because They Don't Love You, They Cheat to Feel Alive, offers a sophisticated psychological framework for understanding male infidelity, self concept collapse, identity anesthesia, the addiction to performance, and the mirror effect of long term intimacy. These concepts contain genuine insights about how many modern men experience identity and relationships. But by treating infidelity as an understandable response to these psychological dynamics rather than a moral failure requiring transformation, the article ultimately provides a sophisticated rationalization for behavior that ancient wisdom, Christian, Jewish, and classical, recognize as destructive to human flourishing. The early Christian response would affirm that yes, long term intimacy exposes weakness. Yes, many men struggle with performance based identity. And yes, the loss of novelty can feel like death. But these aren't problems requiring escape, they're the necessary conditions for genuine growth. The man who feels transparent, unimpressive, and stagnant in his marriage is being offered an invitation to allow the false self built on performance to die so that a true self grounded in virtue, covenant, and genuine presence can emerge. This isn't easy. It requires what the ancients called metanoia, fundamental reorientation of heart and mind. It requires practices of confession, humility, gratitude, and attention. It requires a community that supports rather than enables, that offers both grace and accountability. It requires a vision of human flourishing that includes constraint, sacrifice, and the patient cultivation of virtue rather than the immediate satisfaction of every desire. But this ancient wisdom promises that this harder path leads to genuine aliveness, the kind that doesn't require constant novelty to maintain, the kind that deepens rather than dissipates over time, the kind that survives being fully known because it's grounded in something deeper than performance. The abundant life Jesus promised, the eudaimonia of Aristotle's description, the covenant faithfulness the prophets celebrated, these represents a form of human flourishing that include passion and joy precisely because they're rooted in fidelity and truth. The choice isn't being feeling between alive through affairs or resigning yourself to stagnant faithfulness. The choice is between the temporary intoxication of performance for a new audience and the hard won satisfaction of becoming a person of genuine character who can love and be loved without masks. In conclusion, ancient wisdom is clear. Only one of these paths leads to life.
Indeed, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Mr. Mac. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, people. Infidelity today is often explained through psychology, impulse, or digital temptation, but ancient wisdom offers a deeper diagnosis on rooted in the hunger of meaning, connection, and self understanding. So, Mr. Mink, would you like to plug in something?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Write the book, grow the business. Connect with me on LinkedIn, GMIC, the Doctor of Digital Smith, PhD. Listen to the podcast, the Doctor of Digital Podcast, and a couple volumes can pick up on Amazon. That is On Track Ian Hunter and Burning America.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Mink, the Doctor Digital, and can please listen to our baby podcast, Mental Health 101. Now, Mental Health 101 is created to empower our mental health awareness. So, Mr. Mink, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my friend. Until next time, Deus Volt.
Modicum people, see you soon.